Hello guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Other Girls Club podcast. I have a guest with me today. I have Lauren Rowles, a 3-time gold medal winning Paralympic champion, award-winning athlete, champion, history maker and queer icon. Her remarkable journey began in 2012 at the age of just 13, when she woke up one morning paralysed from the waist down. Inspired by the Paralympic Games that year, she began her career as an elite athlete just a year after. 13 years later, she has built a formidable legacy, defining herself as changing the game one stroke at a time. Please welcome Lauren Rowles to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Sophie.
Thank you for being here. How are you today?
Good. I'm really excited because I've been listening to the episodes of the podcast and you've had some big people on at the minute. I was listening to a couple of the last episode that you did, and I was really just enjoying the vibe of it. I think the diversity of the people that you have on and the stories. I love storytelling. So for myself to hear other people's stories and kind of why they got into doing what they're doing, it's just what I love about podcasts.
Yeah.
And so I'm really loving it.
I love that you've actually been listening as well. And so I'm going to ask you as well, what have you been reading/listening to this week? So if I remember rightly, you're an audiobook listener like me, right?
Yeah, I'm audiobooks, so I've got absolute raging ADHD. So for me, reading, I can't stay focused unless it's absolutely silent in a room. My partner, she can read through anything. Jude, she sits there and she's got her Kindle out. She can be watching the TV, multitasking, and she can be reading. I have to have absolute silence to be able to read.
Really?
Yeah, always been like it since school. And I think that's why I was, how I went undiagnosed with ADHD at school, I don't know, because I could not focus in class. And I think it's because there was so much going on around me. I could never just sit there and focus on what was happening in front of me.
Yeah.
So yeah, books are not my strength, but I do really love reading. In particular, I'm quite a big non-fiction girl. So for me, I love I'm the cliche athlete. I love a sports biography, that classic story. So yeah, but at the minute I'm actually listening to audiobook. I'm listening to The Hardest Geezer, Russ Cook, who he ran the first ever person to run the length of Africa. Phenomenal book. Genuinely, I read a lot of sports books, and now you kind of get used to the flow of it, and everybody has their story, but he is one of the maddest guys I think I've ever heard of. So he talks about his story. He essentially talks about being quite a young 20-year-old and being out drinking a lot, going out to clubs. He'd lost his sort of way a bit and was going out with his mates. And one night he was sat in a club and he was thinking, what am I doing with my life? I need to really get a grip and do something with it.
Yeah.
So he was in the middle of this club. I can't remember where he lived now. My memory's awful. But he runs from the club. He just leaves the club and he runs all the way home. And it's like a 5-hour run home, because he was so unfit at the time. He had really bad gambling addiction. There was loads of things happening. And then he just runs home from the club. He even sleeps on the way home. But he's like, I'm determined to get home and run from the club. Quite literally running from his problems. And that kickstarted his running journey. And he really got into then doing this ultra running. And he's taken on a bunch of challenges. And he's most famous for last year completing. He did the entire length of Africa.
I think I saw this last year.
And it took him for about a year. So he's quite iconic because he's got a big, thick ginger beard.
Yes, I know this guy,
you've probably seen him. And about a week after he came back from Africa, he actually ran London Marathon, which is when I started following him and getting up to date.
After?
Yeah, it was mad. He's one of the... Go and listen to this book. It's called The Hardest Geezer. It talks about all his journeys and his life and his career. But in this process of him running through Africa, he gets held hostage. He gets held at gunpoint multiple times. It takes him nearly a year to run the length of Africa. And it's just one of the most phenomenal stories I think I've ever heard of. And I've been listening to it at the minute because I'm currently training for London Marathon.
Yeah.
So I've been listening to it to give me some inspiration. And honestly, I was sat the other day doing an indoor rowing session and I was listening to it on audiobook. And normally I listen to music, but I was kind of on my own and I was doing a really long session. And I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to change it up a little bit. I'll stick my audiobook on. I put this book on and I literally just zoned out, listened to the book. And before I knew it, an hour had gone by and I was just absolutely obsessed with it. So yeah, I'm really into that at the minute. I'm yet to still finish it. So please nobody give me any spoilers. But honestly, one of the most insane guys with the most insane mindsets you've probably ever met in all of your life. But yeah, he's just announced that he's taken on New Zealand. So he's doing the entire length of New Zealand, which is just mad. So yeah, and I've just started following him on social media, and he's just an epic guy and somebody that, you meet a lot of people in the world of sport that, have just got a different kind of mindset. And they're just different gravy, but he's another level, and the challenges that he wants to take on and the awareness that he's trying to raise around, people that are trying to get people into running and kids that probably have lost their way a little bit, I think really resonates with me and my story and where I started out in sport.
I mean, that leads me nicely on to talk about your journey as well, but that is a crazy, crazy story. Obviously, you have an incredible legacy within sport, within just only in just over a decade, really.
Yeah.
But I want to start off by going right back to the beginning. So if there's anyone listening who maybe doesn't know about your story, or just like a reminder of like your story and like how it started. Because if I'm right in thinking, now you corrected me on the pronunciation earlier, and I've already forgot. Is it transverse myelitis?
Yes,
I got it right.
Yeah.
Yes, big win for Sophie today. So you had transverse myelitis when you were 13. So very different to my story. You woke up paralysed one day.
So I think kick it back even further than that. Probably when I was about 7 years old. So I'm 27, nearly 27 now. And when I was about 7 years old, so God, 20 years ago, I'm getting on. I had a dream that I wanted to go to the Olympics. I was literally the girl, probably that you had at your school. I was obsessed with the Olympics. I was obsessed with being an athlete. I was way more obsessed about running faster than the boys, being better than them at football than I was ever kissing them. I was that girl that was just, I used to, be so competitive. My best friend who I used to, she's not at all obsessed with sport, but I used to play netball with her, and she said, I hated you. When we used to play against each other, she was like, I hated you. But no, that was, for me, I was just obsessed with doing it. And I remember watching Beijing sort of 2008 Olympics, and some of my childhood heroes growing up, Denise Lewis, Kelly Holmes, just absolute icons of women's sport as well. And I remember just being obsessed. And then, fast forward then a few years later, and on the 2nd of February 2012, I went to school one day. I can't even remember what I did. It was that normal. And then I came home from school. I went to bed that night, and I woke up the next morning, and I woke up not being able to feel my legs and not being able to move them properly. And that was obviously like the scariest moment of my life, but mainly because how do you explain that? Now, to give you a bit of context of what I was like as a kid, when I called my mum in and said to her, something's wrong with my legs, like I can't stand up, she turned around to me and said, Lauren, like, hurry up and get ready to school. Like, you're not missing a day off of school. It kind of gives you a context of what I was like as a kid, that I would often skip school. But generally, I was that sort of girl that had undiagnosed ADHD and was a little bit naughty, disruptive in class. But for me, sport was my everything. But this morning when that happened to me, you just have a gut feeling that just something is wrong. Yeah. And I couldn't explain it. How at 13 do you comprehend what has just happened to you? And equally, I think when you're young, you never think anything's permanent. Yeah. So I remember being I went into hospital, and they started doing all these sort of tests and scans, and I felt quite unwell quite quickly with it. And it turns out I had transverse myelitis, which still to this day is quite rare. It's basically where your antibodies get confused. You may have a cold or something that they need to go and fight. So your antibodies usually, make you a bit better. In my case, they went and attacked my spinal cord. So it left me with inflammation around my spinal cord, which then affected my nerve and gave me the damage that I have now and left me in the chair. And, you can't quite comprehend when somebody tells you that. And I remember knowing it was serious when the doctor, I was in Birmingham Children's Hospital at the time, pulled my mum to one side, and I remember watching them talk like over in the corner, and I was laying in the hospital bed, and they sort of were talking to her about it, and she came back over crying. And I remember asking her if everything was going to be okay, and she sort of like looked at me and just was like, yeah, like, but I just knew she was kind of lying, and she just didn't really know. And I think now I'm a parent and now I'm a mum, I really get it, because you are that rock for your child. Like, you are the thing that, when your kid comes to you and, they're like, oh, I've hurt myself, or this is going to happen in life, or, really feel like the world is ending. Yeah. You are that thing that you are the one going, it'll be okay. And for the first time ever in my life, I saw my mum's eyes and I knew that it wasn't going to be okay. And I knew that she didn't know what the future held. And I think that was the minute for me it really hit, that my life was about to change for absolutely ever. Yeah, that kickstarted that sort of year-long process in my life where I was, constantly having medical treatment. I was in rehabilitation and I was learning what this new life meant for me. Yeah. And you know what? Looking back now, to think back, you know, that's 13 years ago. I actually celebrated what I was like my half and half birthday, but my anniversary of my injury only sort of last week, and it really hit me that I've spent half of my life now able-bodied and half my life disabled. And I think that both me and my mum, she sort of texted me in the morning, and just to look back on that time in our lives, and you know, she used to sit there in the hospital beside me and every night, and pretty much like, you know, we all know NHS settings, but she would literally sleep on a chair next to me for most nights until they could get her a bed. And I think it's just one of the most I get emotional about it, not because I've sort of lived through it and it is quite traumatic, but because I can only imagine being a parent now, what my mum must have felt going through that, and the worry and the uncertainty of that. And now I look back and go, God, look what we've achieved now, and we've done it all together. So yeah, these are more tears of joy and looking back and reminiscing. And certainly last week, that was a moment of when she texted me, and she said like how proud she was of me. And I really look up to my mum. So for her to sort of have those words to say about me, but also for me to turn around and say thank you to her as well, because it's the people that are there for you in those dark moments. My friends that have been there along the way, came to visit me in hospital, and are still there now all these years later, coming to my races. And I think that's what means the most, is the people that have been through that experience and come out the other side and still support you through thick and thin.
Making me get emotional as well. But you know what, it's funny because I think even though we have really different injuries, that I became injured through like an accident, so for me there wasn't that, oh, what's happening, I don't know. Well, there was a little bit of that, obviously, because I didn't really know what a spinal injury was or anything like that, but there was a very definitive like catalyst point. There was an accident and that caused an injury. But with yours, there was that element of like, I just woke up, like, I don't know what's happened. But even despite that, like the journeys are so similar. Like when you're talking about, you know, like your time in rehab and everything like that, like it reminds me so much of my journey. And I often think about like my dad as well, like when, like me and my dad are obviously really, really close. And I think a lot of the time that he was very much like, he didn't know if everything was going to be okay. But I remember something he used to say is like, you know, like you will be okay regardless. Whether that outcome is you walk or you recover or not, doesn't matter, because I know that you will be okay. It doesn't matter what that ends up looking like, but I've got complete faith in you. And it's really just funny how like our journeys are so similar. And I look back on the anniversary of my accident every year, and I sometimes can't believe that, one, it's been so long, but then two, like I feel like it's been forever. Like it's really hard to...
Do you also get the feeling sometimes that it's like looking at somebody else, like when you replay it in your mind, you're like, you don't think that sometimes you're talking about, or sometimes obviously like I speak about my story so much now, and you sort of become very desensitized to it, right? And I've done so many interviews, and over the years, like I've done so many talks about it, I've become really desensitized to it, and in a way that's really sad. But in another way, I look back and I'm like, that is a completely different person as well, and I'm really like sort of proud of where I am right now, but there's also that part of me that I can really connect with that person, of that girl that was in hospital. And I think sometimes, you know, I sometimes feel like I'm talking about another person in most respects, but then there's an emotional side of me that just can take myself right back there in that hospital bed or to that moment. And I don't know if you feel that, but sort of over the years you become a little bit desensitized to it, but actually when you take yourself back there and you allow yourself to emotionally get back to that space, it can be quite difficult still to work through that trauma. And it's taken me a long time as well to know I can have boundaries with that, and not everybody you know can have access to those pieces of me that are traumatized by those events. And I think because you do have a disability, people think that they can just, you know, have your medical record on file and go, here it is to the world. And I found that hard for a really long time, and now I'm okay with it. But then sometimes I'm just like, I'm not going to just disclose to you. Like sometimes I'll be in Tesco on my weekly shop and somebody will come up to me and go, oh, what happened to you then? And I'm thinking, why should I tell you my traumatic life story of how did you end up in that then? And I know that probably don't mean, I had someone come up to me, I went to get my nails done the other day, and he went, I have a friend just like you, just walk past me then. And I was like, you know, I think there's this thing of when you have a disability, people have this impression that they can just like open up to you,
whatever you want,
or that you need to tell them like your whole life story. And I'm like, I'm just doing my weekly shop.
I used to work in retail before I did this full time, and it was literally, it blew my mind the amount of times that I would literally just be working on the checkout, and I'd be like, oh, do you want me to approve your alcohol? And they'd be like, why are you paralysed, or why are you in the chair? And I'd be like, that have anything to do with your Smirnoff vodka? Like, and I'd just be like, I could not believe like the audacity of it. And I found it really hard as well. I remember like really early on having to be like, right, because I think as well, like, as a woman, I was like, I don't want to upset anyone, I don't want to offend anyone, but I learnt really on, I'm gonna have to assert my boundaries because I can't talk about this every single day.
And I think you were one of the first people, to be honest with you, like when you came onto the social media scene and you started doing what you were doing, I think you were one of the first people that were outrightly like, you know what, I'm going to have a boundary with it. And I think a lot of us athletes, because the nature of our jobs and what we do, and we have to be interviewed and all these things, we've just sort of put that out into the world. And I think, I remember when you started sort of coming onto the scene and doing social media stuff, and I remember being like, fair play, like, you're not going to just like,
for it.
Yeah, I bet. But I bet a lot of people were like, sort of backed away from it a little bit, because I think there's this impression then, well, if you're not going to open up about your traumatic story, then what interests you to us? And fair play to you for doing that. And I guess along the way that you've been able to open up in bits but in the way that you want to. And I think you know, slay to you for doing that. But I guess I wish over the years that I'd probably had a little bit more of that control and not just sort of unravel my trauma for other people's entertainment at times, and that's sometimes what it's felt like.
I think sometimes the question that I always ask myself is like, what does me telling you this gain? Like, there are in some scenarios where I'm having a conversation with someone and I think, do you know what, like I might open up about this. If someone's had like an accident as well, or you know, they know someone's had an accident, and I'll say, look, like I had an accident when I was 21, I'll talk about it. But then I think as well, something I always bear in mind is, as soon as I mention the accident and what happened, it's all people want to talk about. And so when people say like, oh, but it helps raise awareness, it doesn't. It helps you know more about my life, which has its time and place, yes. But if we want to talk about disability and you want to know more about disability, let's talk about public transport. Let's talk about healthcare. Let's talk about the housing problem. Like, there's so much we can talk about disability that would raise awareness that has nothing to do with like the most personal and traumatic thing that's ever happened to me. And I think that's the problem. I don't think people realise just quite how traumatic it is. Like, people understand it as an abstract construct to like go through trauma and go through an accident, but like it changes like every cell in your body. It changes who you are. It changes how your mind works. It changes the way you interact with the world, and not just the actual accident itself, but everything that followed after. So when someone asks me, how did you, why are you in the chair? I don't just think about the accident. I think about the time in rehab. I think about all of the friends and the partner that I lost as a result of becoming disabled. I think about all of the ableism that I've faced. Like, it's such a loaded question when you could just ask, how's your day? Like, there's so many other things we could talk about, which I think would just be so much better for everyone. But talk to me about the London 2012 Paralympics, because obviously huge moment, because you were, if I'm right in saying, when you, I keep going to say when you had your accident, but obviously it's not an accident. I'm so used to talking in like my frame of mind. But when you became disabled, it was around a very similar time, wasn't it? Yeah,
so I became disabled in the February of 2012. And obviously by the summer then London came around.
Yeah.
And now I grew up in Birmingham, so I had no concept of what disability really was. And like many people, I guess, when I was growing up, I wasn't educated. And the only thing I ever saw of disability represented was in, your soaps on TV or in films. And it was always really that it would be depicted as that you were pretty lonely. You'd never really want to live your life. You were always, struggling with your mental health. You would never like live independently and do normal things. And I think that for me then, when I became disabled, I feared all of them things happening to me because of what I'd seen and that representation of disability in EastEnders or whatever it may be, or the storylines at the time, because that's all I had consumed, and I hadn't got anybody in my life that was disabled. And I often, stupidly, I think back now, but I often commonly sort of associated having a learning difficulty with a physical disability as well. And so then, obviously, then when I became disabled, I spent a lot of time in hospital, and you start to learn the world then as a life with someone that had a disability. But I remember my mum saying to me, do you want to go to the Paralympics and go and watch it? Now, I never knew what the Paralympics was. I had no idea. The only person I'd ever seen doing sport who had a disability was, and I don't know if you remember this, but this is going back some time, was a BBC One advert that had a guy in a basketball wheelchair, and he used to dance him underneath the basketball hoop. Real niche, but and his name is Adi Repatan.
Yes.
You might I go back and watch it on YouTube. It was part of your memory. And he used to dance underneath, and there used to be like funky little tune used to go to it. It used to be in the ad breaks on BBC One. And that was my only time I'd ever seen anybody remotely do anything to do sport. And obviously that wasn't even, he was just dancing underneath a basketball hoop. So then when my mum said, you want to go to London, I just had no concept of what she was even talking about. But slowly sort of started to hear these whisperings around Paralympics and stuff, because I was in Stoke Mandeville, which is the birthplace of the Paralympics. That's where I was doing my rehabilitation. So when I was in the children's unit there, the nurses were saying to my mum, you know, Lauren's really sporty. You should take her into London and actually go and watch it. Now, when my mum suggested this idea of going into London for me, bearing in mind, I'd just become disabled. I was really embarrassed about it. I didn't want to be out and about in my wheelchair. So what's the best place to take somebody that feels like that? In the middle of London. Well, my mum's a stubborn woman, as all great women are, and she didn't care. She pushed me out into London and we went in for the day, and that day absolutely changed my life. I remember pushing into the park in London that day, and I remember thinking that my mum was a minority because she could walk, because there was so many disabled people there. And I had this overwhelming feeling like I'd entered a different realm of life. And I saw not only just from the athletes that were competing there, but the spectators. You know, I remember seeing loads of disabled people there with their kids and just living normal life. And I think it showed me two sides of things. It showed me the elite side that is sport and what you can achieve. And that's exactly what I wanted to do since I was a young kid. So it reignited that dream within me. And then it also showed me another side of life, which was normal life and life beyond disability. And I think that was so powerful for me, because I was so scared. And the thing I was probably most scared about was never having what my friends had, and never having the future that I feel like I've been robbed of because I had a disability. But seeing the people in the park that day with their kids, driving out of the stadium, when, you know, getting their chairs in the car, driving out the stadium, I remember just feeling to myself like life's going to be all right. And within a day, I literally pushed out the park and I said to my mum, this is what I want to do. I want to go to the Paralympics. And we started out on looking for me to get involved in the club. And it took until the November, that was the summer, it took until the November to find us anywhere, because it was so difficult, even after London, to find anywhere that would take me in to do any sport. And we finally found a wheelchair racing club in Coventry that I joined. I started there in the November, and I did my first ever session on a track, and that reconnected me with then the world of sport, and from that moment changed absolutely the trajectory of my life.
Yeah, what an amazing story. I mean, it almost feels kind of cosmic, doesn't it? Of like the timing of everything was so perfect, like perfect, you know, quote unquote, but like you becoming disabled in the February, the games being in the August, sort of like the summer. Everything almost kind of fell into place for you to discover what you needed to at that right time. First of all, I think you're brave just to go into London that soon after having the injury. I don't think I went into London or came into London. It's funny because I live here now and I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. I didn't come into London for 2 years since being disabled. And I kind of like, my family from East London, I've grown up knowing London very well. And I was still just terrified just to come into the city for a day. So I think that in itself is an achievement.
Yeah,
but then
for sure.
To also come out of it and then go, right, I'm going to do that. Like that is an incredible, it must have filled you with such purpose to see that.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I'd had that purpose from when I was a kid, and I was so motivated. I remember always just being like, I'm going to make the Olympics one day. And I truly believe that. And I think then when you lose that, and I spent so many months in hospital just literally giving up, and I just thought, well, what's the point now? If I can't walk, I can't run, because running was my thing for me. I used to do football with the boys, and then when I was about 12, like most girls in sport, they kicked me out because I couldn't play with the boys anymore because of the rules, and then there was never a women's team, and so I fell out of football, and then I fell into running because I was a pretty good runner, and then then when I became disabled, obviously like running wasn't the option then, so all I wanted to desperately be able to do was run. So I think for me, the natural transition and then back into track and getting into doing wheelchair racing was really where it felt like home for me. And obviously, like, wheelchair racing is very different from running in a lot of senses. Obviously, you're using your arms, you're in a big racing chair. So, you know, there's big differences. But for me, being back on that track just felt like absolute freedom. And it's something that at that point in my life, when I felt pretty angry at what the world had done to me, I really needed that freedom and that escape just to get on the track, push my chair, and then go home. And I felt like that was really keeping me on the straight and narrow from really falling down a very slippery slope mentally. Yeah.
Because it could be easy to fall down slippery slope mentally. I know definitely if I'd not had, because I was really angry about, you know, like everything that happened to me as well. And there was a lot of, not even just the accident, but also like everything that followed after it as well. And I just remember thinking like, how much more can she take? Like,
yeah, exactly.
You know,
like, how much more can life throw at me?
Exactly. But I think if I'd definitely not had my dad, I always remember my dad marching me to the gym after I had my injury. So my injury was in July of 2017. I got discharged from hospital in November, and which, by the way, going in peak summer and then coming out in winter was such a mindfuck for the body. I was like, what do you mean? It's freezing cold now. That's why I have no sense of like temperature right now. But yeah, and I just remember in the January, it was like in the first week of 2018, my dad was like, right, you've been out for a little while now, like you've had Christmas, and he was like, we'll take you around to the gym. And he also, as well, not only just signed me up to the gym, but he walked with me so that we knew that there was an accessible route, so that I knew like where to take myself. And I think if I'd not had him pushing me and being like, right, you're going to do this, I so easily would have just, have been like, oh, I'm not going to do that. Either because I thought like, oh, that's not something, I don't see other disabled people doing that. I'm more than often than not the only disabled person in the gym, or like, you know, it's just easier not to. If I'd not had my dad to be like, oh, we're going to do this. Absolutely would not do it. But it gave me such a purpose, and it gave me somewhere to like channel all of that like anger and kind of like upset. It gave me something to like, they always say that energy can't be destroyed, right? It has to be transferred or moved to something else. It gave me that purpose to transfer all of that energy into like exercise and to, you know, recovery in whatever way that looked like. I didn't really know what recovery looked like for me at that point, but I knew it meant coming back to myself and like almost felt like coming home in a way. Yeah,
for sure. And what a top man your dad is, for just like, you need those people that can push you and know how to work with your trauma in the right ways as well, because you know it's taking that first step to do anything, whether my mum taking me into London that day or whatever it may be. You know, you need those people that push you when you probably don't want to be pushed, but you know you need to do it. And I think you know, top work from your dad for doing that, because then that's kick-started, you know, that journey for you of, right, I'm regaining control of my life again and getting back in the gym. And it just starts with that first step, ironically. But yeah, for me it was going into London, seeing that and seeing them athletes do things that I'd never seen, you know, some of my able-bodied friends do. I remember seeing a guy with no arms, no legs swim faster than I'd seen any of my mates swim. And I remember thinking, you know, like, if this guy who is more disabled than what I am swim genuinely absolutely rapid. I remember just sitting there in the aquatic stadium and just thinking, you know what, I need to sort myself out and stop moping about, and I need to, you know, get back out into the world of sport and use what mobility I do have and just get back out there. And yeah, then when I got reconnected, I think then with sport, that really, you know, for me then, because I was at a point in my life as well where I didn't want to talk to a therapist. I was a bit of a stubborn teenager. I didn't want to talk to an able-bodied therapist that had no clue what I'd been through, had no concepts of disability. You know, it felt just like a box-ticking exercise to me when they asked me to do therapy at hospital. And I knew it was all part of your rehabilitation, but for me, I just didn't feel genuine, and I couldn't open up to anybody about what I was feeling. For me, sport was my therapy. It was that place where I could reconnect, I could heal the bits that had hurt, and yeah, without that, I don't know what I really would have done, if I'm honest with you, looking back, if I hadn't have had that opportunity to heal that part of myself in my own way. I don't know what I would have done, if I'm honest with you. And it feels like you say, like the universe aligns and fate comes together, because it was all the timing of that, and I really needed that at that point in my life.
Yeah, it's funny you say about the therapist as well, because I was in Stanmore. I wasn't straight Modeville, but I know they're quite similar in the way they practice and stuff. So, but I remember them being like, you know, you need to go to a psychiatrist. And I remember me being like, me? Yes. Yeah, I needed therapy massively. And I remember being like, I'm not going to sit in front of some able-bodied therapists and have them try and, you know, like tell me what to think and feel, blah, 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 blah. I was saying all of this really ignorant stuff. And then they were like, okay, just go. And I was like, okay. So I went. My therapist was also a lady in a wheelchair. And I remember being like, oh, okay. Yeah. And it really shut me up, because I was like, okay, like, yeah. She was like, just give it a try. She was like, you know, she's like, I don't know whether this is going to work for you. These sessions might help, they might not. She was like, but just give me a chance to do my job. And I remember thinking like, okay, yeah, fair play, like I will. And I remember she was brilliant for me. She was really, really good. But like, yeah, she also got me back in the gym. She got me back into sport, back into fitness. That was like a huge part of our journey. But talk to me about your sport in particular. So you went to the Paralympics and you saw obviously all of these amazing different sports. You saw sport being adapted in the way that you've never seen before. So obviously I mainly know you as for rowing, but you started off in wheelchair track, right?
Yeah, started off in wheelchair track, and I did that for a couple of years throughout when I was doing my GCSE. So when I was at school, it went from literally doing one session in the November to then you're actually all right at this. So I started doing it then a couple of times a week led to a couple of times a day. And before I knew it, I was pretty much a full-time athlete. And that for me was the maddest transition in my life of I would be going to school doing my GCSEs, but then I'd be surrounded by, be going to training and be looking at, okay, what major competition can we do? And that for me then was projecting into the next major would have been Commonwealth Games in 2014. And so I started to really plot my chess pieces towards that, and I think then I started to try and hit qualifying times, and this was all on top of trying to study as well. And as I said before, raging ADHD, so for me already studying was difficult, but I think I really learned something about discipline during that time. I look back and think, how did I do it? But I was so disciplined in the way that I would go to training. I'd do as much as I possibly could, and I was so that was what my purpose was. But then I knew as well that I had to still be at school. I knew I had to be, and for me being back at school as well was a big thing, because I wanted to be back with my mates. I wanted to be normal, so I wanted to be back in mainstream education. I didn't want to just do sport. I wanted to be normal still. So yeah, then went all the way to fast forward to Commonwealth Games in 2014. The youngest team member of Team England, 16 years old. I remember meeting Kelly Holmes for the first time, my childhood hero. Yeah, just moments you'll just never forget in your life. I remember pushing out into the stadium in Glasgow full of tens of thousands of fans just screaming. And I remember just thinking I made it. And that was really the catalyst for me for them wanting to take it on and become the best. I think that was the moment where, when I was in that stadium, I was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, every single day. And yeah, that really what plotted them for me, that ambition to go on and take on what would be the Paralympic Games. And then weirdly enough, it was in February again in 2015, and I was taking a break from wheelchair racing, and I was kind of in a bit of a hump with it. I wasn't really, loving it all too much. I think I'd burnt out a little bit doing my GCSEs and Commonwealth Games in the same year, and actually just being a bit of a teenager as well. I was just sort of like, well, I'm going to take a bit of a break from training. And I was back at Stoke Mandeville for a week, because until you're 18, you have to go back there every week to sort of have like a check-in with their team there as part of the young people's unit, which is a phenomenal facility. But I was back there for a week in February in 2015. So I've been disabled a while now, and, was full-time doing track racing. But I was sort of, not training as much. And I was in the hospital, and the sports therapist said to me, Lauren, there's a British rowing here, and they've got some talent scouts. Please come down to the session later on after you've finished your physio and everything, and you can sit on an indoor rower, because they're looking for, people to join the team. And I wasn't bothered about it. I grew up not knowing what rowing was. You don't row on the canals of Birmingham, I'll tell you that for sure. So I had no concept of really what it was. And I just thought, you know what, I'm not getting involved. Anyway, later comes on, and the therapist comes down to the ward, and she says, Lauren, please come. Honestly, I think you should come down to the session. So she drags me down to the sports centre, and I get on this indoor rower. And no joke, the only reason why I did the session is because there was a bloke sat next to me, poor guy, about 50 years old, and I thought, I'm going to thrash you. And it's that, I can't help but be competitive, I'm sorry. And he was freshly disabled as well, I'm really sorry. But
poor guy.
Yeah, he's poor 50-year-old bloke. I mean, he had no chance, did he? But I remember sitting next to him thinking, and he was giving me a little bit of, smack talk too. And I remember just sitting next to him and thinking, I'm going to thrash you. And so we did this little indoor rowing test. I absolutely smashed up the handle. It's probably the worst thing they ever saw. But actually, they said to me at the end of the session, do you want to come and try it out for real, get in a boat? And I'm thinking, yeah, go on then, get in there. I said, you've got to drive to Reading. Well, I lived in Birmingham, so that's 100 miles away. And I'm thinking, how am I going to persuade my mum to drive me to Reading? So I call her up. And I said, Mum, British rowing want me to go and get in a boat. And she's probably thinking, what the hell has gone on? Because she wasn't at hospital with me. I just went on my own. And I remember saying down the phone, Lauren, what have you been doing? What's been going on today? But she, you know, I convinced her to drive me to Reading and to get in a boat. And I think about a week later, actually, I got on the water for the very first time. And I genuinely remember sitting there and looking out onto the lake and thinking, why is everybody going backwards? Because I thought I turned up to do a session of canoeing. Now, if you still don't know the difference, one goes forwards, one goes backwards.
Is that the only difference?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And obviously you have different variations of canoe kayak. But they go forwards in what they do, and obviously like they have one paddle and they go like that,
right.
Whereas we row backwards. And I remember just thinking, this ain't what I signed up for. But I got in a boat, and genuinely one of the most powerful moments of my life was when I got in that boat for the very first time. I pushed off from the side of the land, and I literally just watched my wheelchair fade into the distance. For me, one of the most powerful moments of my life, and that's because I think I was at a point where, you know, I was involved in sport, but I was getting a bit older, and I think I really realised that I was going to have a very different life to my peers and my friends around me, and I started to really realise that life was never going to be the same. And I think it started to sink in for me as well that this was going to be permanent for the rest of my life, and that wheelchair was going to be something I was going to be stuck in. And it really felt like that at the time. And so when I got in that boat and I went on that water for the very first time, I think it was such a powerful moment of realisation for me that, you know, it was about, you know, seeing my disability and visualising it in a different way and having my moments where I could be out of the chair and just escape from it from a little bit, escape from that disability, because I didn't feel different when I was in a boat. And that was it then. I was hooked. Yeah. I didn't care how good I was at it. Obviously, I wanted to be the best, but I didn't care how good I was at it. I just loved being on that water, and I wanted to do it every single day of my life. And I still feel like that 10 years later. If I don't get to go out and get out in a boat and be on the water, I'm a miserable little git. So, yeah, and that really did. I didn't care how really good I was at the time. And then 5 months later, after I took my first strokes, I ended up in my first world championship. So, you know, the rate of growth was just mad. But, you know, that first moment for me, I will always remember my first day in that boat, and just that feeling for me of escaping the disability. And that was a really powerful thing for me at that moment in time. And then obviously it went on to become a bit more of a serious thing, and it wasn't just about escaping disability, it was about how do I be the best in the world.
Yeah. It is interesting, isn't it, when you do, because I do mainly a lot of like weight training, I weight lift. That's kind of like my exercise. I don't do sport like professionally, or although I do want to row or kayak this year. I'm not sure which one.
Okay.
So it's actually on my 2025 like list.
We gotta make that happen.
Yeah. So I've said to my friends, because we wanted to do it last year and we realised just a bit too late, the weather was turning. So I said to them, right, I said this summer, I said we just want to try it. I just want to get in a boat and just try, because I don't do I do swimming, right? I swim, but I don't do a sport, and I think they're very different.
Yeah.
So I said I want to do a sport I've never done before. I want to do something completely different and just see.
Have you seen the girl on TikTok? Sorry to interrupt you, but have you seen the girl on TikTok that's doing 28 sports in 28 days?
No.
Genuinely, I'll find her profile for you, but she's on TikTok and she's doing 28 sports in 28 days. She's doing sports that she's never done before. I watched one the other day where she went to table tennis class or table tennis club in Brighton, and she said, honestly, you would have never thought I'd met these women like an hour ago. She was like, I've had the best fun. But she's doing all different sports for 28 days, and she's joining all different types of clubs. And honestly, really inspiring. I just thought, you know what, that's really cool. And she's finding like all different teams of people, and mainly women's teams as well that she can join. And I thought that was a really cool idea. So anyway, I'll link you up with her.
Let me know, yeah. Cause
she's awesome. But you should do something like that and like try just different things, because you never know what you could be good at. Not necessarily that you want to go into doing Paralympic sport, because obviously like not every disabled person should just go into do Paralympic sport. I'm a big believer in that. But you just to do something recreationally and just to get out and be active, just for your mental health, because being out in the water and being out in the Thames is incredible. When you're on the middle of the Thames and you're like looking around, it's one of the most incredible views. And yeah, just to get out for an hour a day, it really does help. It helped me so much with the reconnecting with you know, all the things that primitively, you know, as humans, reconnecting with water and the ground. There's a lot of research to suggest that that's great for our mental health, being outside, being in the fresh air. So I think it really did reconnect me with the things that keep my mind in check and keep me well as well.
Well, it's funny you said that about the water, because I love swimming. Love swimming. And for me, I had a similar moment as well. So I started to swim actually when I was in rehab, when I was swimming in Stanmore. And so they actually basically just taught me how to swim as a disabled person, because I was very much like, I was a good swimmer before, I was all right. I've always been strong because I used to jump in the water as a kid. Like, I'd just be jumping in. I was one of those kids where we get to the hotel, I'd jump in the pool. Like, not even unpack, just jump in. But I remember being like, how do I swim as a disabled person? I can't use my legs. And they were like, you've got upper body and a core, haven't you? So they taught me how to swim like that. But I had a similar moment where I thought, I'm not in the chair anymore. Now that I've been disabled for longer, and now I have a better relationship with using my chair, and I have a better relationship with being disabled, I kind of I don't see it as escaping my chair anymore. When I get back in, because I think when I started swimming in rehab, I used to dread getting back in the chair because I just want to be free in the water. Yeah. Whereas now I think I get back in the chair and I see that still as another form of independence. But I still think it's really good for you as for me as a full-time wheelchair user to get out of the chair to exercise. One, because physically it opens up my joints, my hips, stretches my hamstrings, but also I remember that when I get in the water, I'm still disabled, but I'm still so strong and powerful, moving through that water. And I often see sometimes other people who I share the pool with, and they're I'm out swimming them, and they're fit, able-bodied people, and they're just I do not know how you do it. And it's you just get in the pool and you fucking go for it. You give it your all. But it is, I think, really powerful, I think, to have that sport that you can kind of just really connect with really physically. That's how I feel when I'm in the water anyway. But
also don't underestimate the little slow lane Huns doing their breaststroke. I'm all for that, the little socialisation in the slow lane, I think that there's a time and a place to absolutely go hell for leather, but I'm also here for the social. So when I do a lot of sport now, for me it's about meeting people, it's about finding people that I relate to, which is what I loved about Paralympic sport as well, because I found people that had similar life stories to me, wasn't bothered about the fact that I had disability, quite frankly couldn't care less about what had happened to me. And I think that really helped me then connect with people that I felt understood what I'd been going through. And now you've just been able to, now I like to assimilate back into I'll go to the gym with anybody, no matter whether you're disabled or you're not. And I really enjoy that element of just going and socialising and doing a bit of exercise at the same time. So same with me, I really enjoy swimming. It's something that I definitely wouldn't take it on professionally, staring at pool tiles for 6 hours a day. I don't know how swimmers do it, but I think it's one of them things that I love being out of my chair, I love being in water. And I think I never ever thought in my lifetime that me being a girl from Birmingham will ever land up doing a sport like rowing, because it does have that stereotype to it of being a bit middle class white sport. And there is still those traditional values within it, but then there's also a lot of diversity and there's a lot of great people in it as well. And I think that we're on our path to really finding talent out there in the unknown places, I'd say, and the places that we've probably not looked before, and giving opportunity to people that probably didn't have it before. So it's also really great to see over the last 10 years in our sport, seeing where it's come and the people that we're reaching out to and the opportunities that we're giving. And people like yourself, you probably never would have done rowing before, but we'll get you out in a boat this summer, that's for sure.
We will. I think I'm going to hold you to that in the summer. I might message you and be hey,
for sure,
where are the boats at? And give it a go. But I'll definitely message you after about that, because I really wanted to do that last year, and I've reminded my friends this year. I'm right, this summer we're getting on a boat. But thinking about, there was a quote from you that you said, it's not just about making champions, it's about giving people the tools to change their life. And I think that really relates really nicely to what you just said about not underestimating the slow lane babes, and people who, it's good to just move your body in the way that you can, because I think sometimes as well, you said something earlier as well about just because you're disabled doesn't mean you have to be a Paralympian. Because I remember, it's so funny, because I was physically fit before my injury. I was really into the gym, I was really disciplined, so people knew me. I wasn't an athlete, I didn't do a sport, but people knew me as someone who was really fit and disciplined. So instantly, when you go to Paralympics, when you're being a Paralympian, I used to look at them and go, oh, you go to the gym? Oh yeah, when you go to the Olympics? And I don't know whether you feel the same, but for me, as someone who watches the Paralympics and who knows different Paralympians, I find it really insulting to Paralympians to just assume that anyone can do it.
Yeah, there's a common assumption that anyone can just step out and do what we do, and you most definitely cannot. I say to a lot of people, I can row faster than you with half my body, and I genuinely mean that. And I think that's what I love about Paralympic sport as well, is the fact that we can do them things. I get into a public gym and I'm absolutely throwing weight around and the guys are looking at me, and I love that. That's what I love about doing top end sport, and even like yourself, hitting the gym, being strong. It's blowing people away, right? It's almost like redefining what their expectations of me would be, and I'm a real defiant character, so for me, I love that, and that's really why I think now I like to get out into spaces that probably you don't see disabled people as well, getting out into gyms, but it can be really daunting. But I think not everyone, why, if everyone's got a disability, why should you just automatically assume that person's really interested in sport as well? Obviously, when it comes to rehabilitation, when it comes to general well-being, like any person, disabled or not, sport is good for your well-being. It's good for your physical health, it's good for your mental health. So I'm a big believer in people getting out and doing whatever that is. But not everybody goes on to go to the Olympics, right? So not everybody goes on to do the Paralympics. And it is, I think when you get it and you realise how high performance Paralympic sport is. But there is a common assumption. I mean, I still get it today. A lot of people confuse Special Olympics with the Paralympics. I think there's still a long way to go to people having that respect and that understanding. And I think it's really as well like people are relating to it as well. And you know, I always say to people, you know, that you know, my dream was always to go to the Olympics, and now I've done the Paralympics. But it does feel different. They're like two separate things. And to me, the Paralympics is special in its own right. But then, then there's the Olympics, and I watch the Olympians that we train with and stuff. And yeah, like the journey that they've been through. And it's so similar to some of the journeys that we've been through. Just remove the fact that they've probably had the physical trauma of having a disability. But we all go through this journey to get to the top level. And we've all got this drive within us to get there. But also as well, there's this whole group of people like yourself. And what I think was really interesting as well is that when the emergence of people like yourselves came along onto social media and were fitness influencers, I think it threw a bit of a spanner in the works for a lot of people. And I remember, and being very upfront and honest with you here, I remember a lot of us athletes thinking, well, who the hell are these lot? You know, like coming into this space, we are the athletes, we also own the fitness and the sport space. And I remember it just being a bit of a moment where everyone was like, well, what's going on now? Because there are people that have disabilities that are doing sport or fitness but have no aspiration to go to the Paralympics. And I think for those, you know, definitely conversations happening within the Paralympic community of going, well, is this going to dilute what we do? And then when you add on the layers of then like you went on to become the first, you know, athlete to go and get signed with a major sports brand, there was all of these things that happened. You know, there's this idea then that then it's competition. Yeah. And I think that was such an interesting time. And yeah, I think now look back and think that was wild, like that we were all felt a bit threatened by that.
That's crazy because I didn't know that.
Yeah, but there is this I guess like I guess for me, like speaking honestly, it's like the sort of thing of Paralympic sport is like the highest level. It's the highest level that you can achieve. And when you get there, it really is like nothing else. But then there is also this realisation that everybody can just do sport without wanting to get to that point. Yeah. And over the years, I think us as Paralympians, because we don't get that, because we want to go to the Paralympics and we see it as the highest thing that you can achieve, we don't get the flip of it. So I think for so long, a lot of us have been working out, well, why the bloody hell wouldn't you want to go to the Paralympics if you were disabled? And if you're already hitting the gym, then why wouldn't you get involved in a sport? Yeah. And I think that along the years, and I guess has come through as well, where I guess like fitness has gone, and now we're seeing the emergence of a whole different bunch of events coming out of fitness. But I think for a long time it's been this move away from traditional sport into people just going to the gym because they bloody love it and they go there 2-3 times a day. Yeah. And I think that it's so interesting how as athletes we perceive what we do as being the most important thing, but actually in the big wide world, I mean, God, you're more successful than most of us. So I think it's also really incredible to see now that there are different communities forming. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say is that now I'm really glad. For a while I was confused about it, but now I'm really glad that there is a space that disabled people can exist and just do fitness and activity without it being Paralympic sport. Because actually, you know what, we all have our thing that, you know, makes us feel like ourselves and we feel like is our purpose. And I think that now we're moving into that space where we are getting these different sections. And you know what, that's a lot like being on the able-bodied side. And I think it's great that there's enough of us now that, you know, some of us do Paralympics, some of us do bodybuilding, some of us do high rocks, some of, you know, whatever it may be, or some of us just go to the gym daily because we love it. Yeah. And I think that is a great place to be at. And I guess the thanks to people like yourself that have paved that way and been able to go, you know, I'm going to do me and I'm not going to be bothered about doing Paralympic sport actually. But then there's a whole community of people out there now doing dance and creative stuff. And I think that that's incredible because for a really, really long time, it's been this narrative of if you are disabled, you go to the Paralympics. And I think it's really nice now that we're starting to have an individuality about us as disabled people. Yeah,
because I think as well, there are some people who might even look at what I do and be like, oh, that's still too much for me. I'm too nervous to even step foot in the gym. And so they look at the Paralympics and might go, oh yeah, that's like really good and amazing, but like it's still unachievable for me. And then it's like, I think finding that like level of entry that is also like approachable to like everyday people. There is another disabled influencer. I think her @ is, and she's called Jenny, but I think her @ is chronically Jenny. I'll double check it. I'll probably put it in the description of this, but she does like average disabled Jen takes on, and she takes on different sports like swimming or different activities as like a disabled person who isn't like, you know, like an athlete or someone who isn't in the gym 3-4 times a week, and she just says this is what it looks like when you're just an average disabled person. And I think that's amazing that now we can have that spectrum of disabled people who are like yourselves, award-winning, like gold medal winning athletes, and then you've got people like me who maybe go like multiple times a week. I've trained, you know, quite heavily for years, and then you've got people who maybe are starting to go to the gym for the first time, and it's not just this two different camps of either you're really, really at the peak of fitness or you're really unfit. And now we have that like spectrum of fitness, which I think ultimately at the end of the day what we want to do, right, is make fitness more approachable for everyone,
for sure,
able-bodied or disabled, like no matter who it is. I think we're getting more and more to that point where it's becoming more of an approachable topic, and people they don't feel that pressure of, oh, but I'm not a Paralympian, or so I can just go to the gym, just try it out and see what it is. Even if, you know, go table tennis on Sunday, see what that's about.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
And just get your body moving, and maybe you do a lap of your local park, or just in some way getting your body moving, and it's almost just like a gateway to then you can then discover other things. You might discover you love sport. You might discover, do you know what, actually, I'm not a huge fan of working out, but it does really benefit me physically. I feel better for it. So I'm going to make the time to do it 3 times a week, but I'm going to have my hobbies and my joy for life elsewhere outside of sport. And that's amazing as well. But it is, I think, amazing how we're now like seeing that shift of like, I do feel like we've come such a long way of having that like spectrum of different levels of fitness. Yeah,
for sure.
Within like,
it's not just elite or not elite. Yeah, and I think there's a really nice blend now between people who just do things for the love of it. And that's what sport should be about, right? I do it for the love of it. I mean, there's other parts to it as well of obviously like I want to be the best at it, but I do it because I love it. And fundamentally, you know, even if when I retire and give it up and hang my blades up and don't do it anymore, I'll still do fitness. And yeah, you know, I think that's a really nice place that we've got to now. But I think for so long, and we were part of the problem Paralympians as well, that, you know, we just believe, well, you just do Paralympic sport then. But actually,
that was the only representation that a lot of disabled people had for a very long time. So I think it's very natural why you would think that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Because you would think like, oh, but that's the representation. So why would you not want to? Like, I can see why you would have that natural sort of thought process.
Yeah, for sure. And when you look at as well, when you have issues around participation numbers and, you know, getting new talent into the sport and making sure that it's consistently evolving and getting better, then when you look at somebody online and go, well, why don't you do Paralympic sport? Then you could help with this problem of, you know, when we look at events and events not being held, we need more numbers. You're thinking, well, you're a fit person that probably could do it. You know, I think there's that element of going, almost wanting somebody to want your dream. And I think that's actually when you detach yourself from that want and just realize, well, that person can just do whatever they want to do. And I think I really accepted probably that a little bit more than when I started to embrace my own, I guess, like when I started to embrace my own individuality within myself, and when I started to realise that not everybody's the same and has the same aspirations. As I've got older, obviously, that sort of maturity comes around where you just think, well, yeah, not everyone wants to go to the Paralympics, and, you know, you have that appreciation for what other people are doing, and it goes from those years of probably when you're in your early 20s and your late teens and you're jealous of what other people have and you compare yourself, you know, and then you get into your mid 20s, and I find then you're in that element where you're like, just want to, you know, just embrace everybody's individuality. And then, like, I'm like to you, you know, it's amazing what you've done in your career, and you can look on that and go, you know, that's incredible, and give you your dues. And give you your flowers because you deserve that. And I think that's really important, is that, like, I love it when people get to that point, and I see, you know, the younger athletes come through and they've got that probably at an earlier age than what I feel like I had. And I think it's incredible that now that we can get to this point where we all go, whatever your jam is, do it, and whatever makes you happy, do it. And I think we're entering a really I mean, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but a really nice era of where everybody's like embrace you, do what you want to do, and applaud each other for that as well. And I think we've got to a really nice place in fitness and sport where that is happening now.
Oh, it's 100% a lot better than what it used to be. I know when I first came onto the scene, I didn't even have a lot of people. I didn't have a lot of peers within my specific space at that time. Like I was for a lot of spaces I was in, the first disabled woman to be there. So, you know, because I wasn't a Paralympian, so I didn't have that community of the Paralympians. So I was kind of a little bit like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing here. So I'm just going to do what I want to do and kind of follow my own path here. And if it makes other people it easier to follow the path into the space as well, that's amazing. But talking specifically about individuality, because obviously it's such an important thing. And I feel like sometimes we don't talk enough about the individuality like within sport, and like we see the like sports people like yourself as like amazing like sports people with all these amazing accolades, but also like you are a person with your own individualities and, you know, with them things that like make you. And I think a lot often about the intersectionality between like obviously we're both disabled, we're both queer, and I think about those two different identities and how they kind of exist like within me. And sometimes I feel like when I'm in disabled spaces and it's like a lot of straight people, sometimes I feel like, oh, my queerness isn't really sitting right here. And then sometimes I'll be in a lot of queer spaces and I don't really feel accepted as a disabled person. And so I feel myself often kind of like thrown between my two identities. And, you know, I'm really, really lucky to have such an amazing group of friends who are, I mean, naturally the way it is, my whole friendship group is queer because of course that just happens naturally. And they've all known me before I become disabled. So they've also learned so much about disability through being my friend. And I really am just so lucky to have that core group of friends. But I always think about the ableism within like the queer community as well. And then I'm thinking particularly about like all of the elements of connecting with the queer community. There's a big accessibility problem. And I don't know how you find that, like your two different identities kind of like how they kind of interact with each other, especially when you're in the space of like sport. And it's a very public facing like arena as well. Yeah.
I think, you know what, when I first came out as being queer, and actually I didn't come out as being anything, and I don't think I ever have. I think everyone just assumed for a very long time that I was a lesbian. And I used to get so many people asking to do collabs with me and ask me to speak at Lesbian Visibility Week. And I used to say to people, I don't know where you've got the assumption that I'm a lesbian, but anyway, just because I'm dating a woman. But then, you know, and I thought that firstly was a really interesting thing, that everybody assumes that you are either lesbian, you're gay, or now, you know, that some people are starting to broaden their horizons, fortunately. And I just guess adopted the term queer because that's what I felt like. I didn't want to really label myself.
Yeah.
And I felt like it was just like the thing of, found it quite liberating as well that queer used to be thrown around as a slur, and now we've adopted that back as a community, and I really love that as a slate to that. But so yeah, I think that, you know, like the defiant nature within me, I really like that, and the rebellious thing within me. So yeah, I think, you know, I identify myself now as queer, but, you know, you can call me gay, you can call me whatever, really, it doesn't really matter. But the main thing within me is I went through a period of my life where I only knew Lauren for who she was on the water. And, you know, if you sit here, most people know me because I have 3 Paralympic gold medals, right? But not a lot of people knew me off the water. And I think I started to get to a point where I lost my way in life and I didn't know who Lauren was. Me being an athlete was my entire personality. And I really started to struggle with my mental health. And then when I came out, I started to embrace my individuality, and I started to really just then like go, well, who is Lauren? How do I want to dress? How do I want to, you know, what am I interested in? Who do I want to hang around with? And like you say, you find your people, right? And what I love so much about the LGBTQ plus community is that I found my people. I found the people that I felt like genuinely cared about me being me and wanting to explore whatever version of that was. And I think that when you talk about the intersectionality of it, what I find really interesting is the queer space for a very, very, very long time has had this ableist, you know, nature about it because of society, right? If you look at, you know, the sort of queer scene in terms of going out, and whether it be going out clubbing or whether it's pride or whatever it is, it's all been built within the minds of somebody that is able-bodied, right? Because for so long there probably hasn't been disabled representation going out and doing those things, but now disabled people are getting out and about more and doing these things and are now part of the organisation of it. You know, you're starting to see some change within there, and I really do think as well that we're getting to a point where so many people I meet, and I genuinely believe this, any probably queer person I meet are always really accommodating to my disability and always go, are you okay talking about that? Is that how you like to be labelled? And because there's that level of consciousness, there's this level of consideration that we have as a community towards each other. And I think that, you know, the people that I certainly hang around with in that community, they have such a level of care and consideration for me and my feelings and my trauma and what I've been through, because they've been through similar stuff. Yeah. Because so many of us from this community have that trauma and have had bad experiences and have been misgendered or have been mislabeled or just, you know, have been suppressed for so long that I think they get it on a level. They don't have a disability, but they get it on some wavelength. They get the fact that, you know, having a disability is difficult and it's hard. And so I have amazing friends that whenever they are hosting events or they're even inviting me out for a coffee, will always think about that next layer. And I guess that's where you're at with your social circle. But then there's a layer of, okay, what about when it's not being organised by somebody you know? Or, you know, you're going to an event or whatever it is. I think there's now this layer of people that are certainly organising these events. They're starting to really learn and educate themselves on how do we make this space accessible to all. And that comes with learning, it comes with time, it comes with education. I think, you know, we have to be patient with that, and we also have to influence with that, which is why, like, when you're talking up your, you know, saying about things, I like to do it in my own way. If I know people that are organising events or whatever it may be, I'll make sure that I go and do a recce of the place with them. I'll give them recommendations on what they could do better. If it was an event that I went to, an awards I went to, whatever it may be, maybe give some feedback on it, what they could have done better. You know, I think there's all these layers to it of the way you can contribute as a disabled person, so that the next person that comes through that is disabled has a better experience than you did. And I think that we owe that to each other as disabled people, to enhance our experience of our community. But it's also, I'm a big believer in now, and I've got to the point in my life where I was really angry for a really long time that nobody ever considered anyone with a disability, or the fact that, you know, people were rude to me because I was queer online, and I used to get hate for it. But I've got to the point now where you have to understand where everybody's background is, where everybody comes from, and that you have to give people the opportunity to show that they can educate themselves and learn and change. And I'm a big believer in that how can you expect somebody to understand the world of disability when they're not affected by it? How can they understand what needs you have when they've never known anyone with a disability? Because you know what, I look back to myself when I was growing up, I was hanging out with no one that was disabled. I didn't know anybody. Does that mean to say I didn't care? No. And I think care is a different thing. When you get to the point when you meet people and they're like, well, I don't care anyway, you're a health and safety hazard, or whatever they say when you have a disability. Costs too much money. Yeah. Well, then you know what, screw you. Not coming to your event anyway, whatever it may be. Those people are a different section, but there are a huge proportion of people that want to try, just don't know how. They don't know how to ask the right questions. And as disabled people, I think we have a responsibility for those who have the voice and have it within them to have the confidence to say, actually, I think you should change this. Yeah. We owe it to each other in the community to help develop that. And I think that that's what's really powerful now, is I think that, like, now I see myself in spaces where I'm like, oh, I've been invited to this and this definitely isn't accessible. So I'll say, like, you know, can we do it somewhere else, or can we get around this another way, or, you know, is there another venue we can look at? And I think now it's looking at how can we, you know, bring that level of awareness so that when we're in the planning stages of these things or whatever it may be, there's that level of, oh, we need to think about everybody involved. Yeah. And yeah, I think now we're at that stage, but I wouldn't say it's through lack of trying for a lot of people. I genuinely believe the LGBTQ plus space is the most accepted I've ever felt in all of my life. Yeah. And I've met some lifelong friends through this space, and people that, you know, now come to my events, watch them, celebrate everything that I do, and have really immersed themselves in disability as well, and what it means to have a disability and the different kinds of disabilities. And I think I'm always grateful to those people, and I do think that because they've had that trauma, because they've been through difficult situations, because they are different themselves, they just get it.
They do. And I think back to my own, like, friendship circle as well, because I became disabled at 21, then I realised I was queer when I was around like 13. So I've always known myself as queer before I became disabled. And I look at my friends at my friendship circle now, and I didn't even think about it till we've had this conversation, but I look at the way they interact with me and the way they handle me going through certain situations with them. And yeah, I can see my own experiences in those, in their experiences, whether that is from them experiencing homophobia or them experiencing racism. Like, I think they can see their own struggles when they see my struggle as well. And I think what you said about disabled people having a responsibility to, you know, to platform our, or to at least like voice our concerns for the safety of not only just ourselves but for each other as well. I think we can take that forward, and we can look at what's going on in the world right now, and we can look at like trans rights, for example. And it's such a scary time to be trans, and I think we can use, you know, think about what we have been through as individuals, and maybe you don't understand transness, maybe you've never met a trans person, but you can think of your own struggle as a disabled person, and you can use that to want to learn. You can use that to learn more, and you can use that to empathize with the struggle that someone else is going through.
You know what I think as well, the situation, I'll speak on it just quickly, but like the situation with trans people and the attack on trans people, I find so devastating, because I see so many similarities in how disabled people are treated, because they're treated like not people.
Yeah.
And whenever I go and do talks and stuff, and people ask how to be good allies and how to do this, and I do so much stuff like that, and I go, do you care about another person?
Yeah.
Like, that's how to be a good ally.
Empathy.
Yeah, that basic human empathy.
I always get asked, you know, like, what radicalised you? Human empathy.
Yeah, like
that is it.
You know, and it's just caring for other people, and like who they choose to be and who they are. And, you know, I think that, you know, as disabled people, we don't choose to be disabled, but there's this level within us that we are treated like literal pieces of dirt at times. And I can't you know, count on the one hand the amount of times that someone's called me a health and safety hazard, or like I don't matter, or, you know, that person in the wheelchair don't even know my name, you know. And I think that, you know, I really relate to that, to then how, I guess, like how the trans community are being treated, because I think it's so sad that people feel the need that they can treat people in this way, and like they aren't human. And I think it's so sad. I really think that, you know, as disabled people, we've battled so hard for people to see us as people, away from what we sit in and away from our disabilities or our mobility aids or whatever it is. And we're still on that journey now. But I think that that's probably why you and I can really relate to the struggle and what trans people are going through. And obviously they're going through it on an absolute brutal level, but it's not very not dissimilar to over the years how disabled people have been secluded, outcasted, you know. And I think that, you know, we need to gang together as a community to really help each other. And I think that that's really, really important now, is that, you know, we get that level, we get that trauma. We've not been through the same experience exactly, but we need to stick together, because you know, it's the power in numbers, it's the power of community. And genuinely, you know, there are people within this community, trans people included, that have been there for me, uplifted me, supported me, and I think we need to do the same in return. And I think that that's really, really important in this day and age.
Thank you so much for coming on, Laura. I'm going to ask you one final question, and that is, how are you chasing joy this week?
I think I'm chasing joy this week by challenging myself to be bog standard at something, right? So I'm currently doing London Marathon and training for London Marathon. I'm going back to my wheelchair racing roots, and I am terrible at it. You know, I've spent 10 years away from the sport. I'm taking on this massive challenge, and it is humbling, genuinely. But the joy in it for me is that I'm meeting people through this experience that I never would have had the courage to speak to before, never had the courage to go, do you want to go out on a run together? You know, I never would have said to somebody, you know, me being in a racing chair and somebody running, I never would have done that before. But I think I'm finding the joy, and I'm chasing the joy in community, enjoying the challenge, and humbling myself at being bad at something.
Paralympian humbling themselves, and that's how they're chasing joy. I love to hear that. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Lauren. Honestly, I feel like maybe we need to do a part 2, because it's been such an interesting conversation.
Wait, when you've done the Rowan session, then we'll come back and we'll speak about the experience.
Do that. Okay, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, mate.